Hey guys, I'm Zara Kane. This week's video is going to be a little bit different, as you can see. Whilst we'll obviously be talking about Genestealer Cults, faction stuff, I'm going to be taking a break from all the tactics and instead come up with a bit of a wish list for all the things I'd like to see changed, updated or fixed for when we finally get a new codex. Now, the day of Ascension might actually be closer than you think, because Warhammer Community posted the other day a little teaser of what was clearly an Acolyte Hybrid's hand on a demolition charge detonator. So that's got the hype train kind of going. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that could mean a few months, maybe, who knows. I think, about fucking time, out of all the factions in the game, apart from maybe Tau, who could need it more than us? I might be fairly competent with a faction and confident that I can win some competitive games, but it's always a struggle and an uphill battle, especially when I'm pitted against certain armies who, they were strong in 8th, and now in 9th, it's just like playing on hardcore mode. Our rules are old, many of them don't even work or make sense anymore. Our arsenal is just outdated, underpowered, and frankly, it's lacking the punch we felt like we had in 8th. Our faction playstyle as a whole is practically a relic, and on top of that, the meta has shifted so far into the durability game that there's no chance we can compete in it, nor can we confidently do our own thing anymore and get away with it. I mean, it all sounds very negative. Sure, the army is really fun to use, regardless of being a massive disadvantage. The thing is, everyone wants to be on an equal footing, even if it's just a fun game, but especially in a tournament or a competitive level, you want to be roughly starting at the same point. Now, I came back to 40k a few years ago after the time where the Genestealer Cult Codex had just dropped, and then it already had its kind of glory days where everyone considered it, the top level. And I'd passed all the, the points changes had come in. It was already feeling a little bit neutered, so I never really got to experience that phase where it was like, the Genestealer Cult is awesome. So now, with the potential change on the horizon again, being honest, I'm not sure if I want this faction to follow in the footsteps of other armies that have seen new codexes in 2021. I don't want Genestealer Cult to be, like a superpower. I mean, I like being the underdog, because the last thing I want to see is all these meta players shelving their Death Guard, the Harlequins and the Custodians, whatever the fuck they play, and then jumping on like a Genestealer Cult bandwagon. That will piss me off, because I wouldn't feel special anymore, which is kind of, shameful to say. But I got into this faction because I didn't want to be like those players. Frankly, I hate playing any game where I've got the best kit or like a big advantage, because dominating other players in that way just feels really fucking lame. Now, one other thing that I'm really scared of is Games Workshop maybe seeing this as a time to fundamentally change the way the faction works. Sure, I mean, it's not likely, but even simple edits to core mechanics such as Cult Ambush could really mess it all up. I mean, playing Cult feels different from other armies. I'd hate to lose that individual approach only to become more homogenized with the rest. Maybe in a few months, we can look back at this happy in the knowledge that it turned out pretty neat. Fingers crossed, So in this video, I'm going to cook up a wish list of all the things I think need to be changed, fixed, improved, or added. It goes without saying that, some new units would be great, some new models. So I'll mention the ideas I've got for that at the end. Let's see what happens. So let's dive in with the most important part, I think, first. Okay, so the cult creeds. I'm going to dedicate a whole video to these soon, because there's a lot of discussions to be had about them. There's Bladed Cog, there's Twisted Helix and stuff. I know which one I prefer, but other people still say Bladed Cog. Now, as you probably know, there's 6 main ones to choose from, and then there's a dozen or so custom ones, which, as far as I'm concerned, they need taking out back and shooting in the head. But we'll talk about that next. So, specifically, I think Twisted Helix does not need to be changed at all. Obviously, I think it's great. Bladed Cog, I think it could stay the way it is. People seem to like it, regardless of what I say. That's their opinion, I've got mine. We won't want to upset the people that take that. The Rusted Claw, in my opinion, is pretty fucking shit. Doesn't even allow the bikers to move and fire mining lasers without penalty anymore, so that should be fixed. And honestly, it needs some sort of other Jackal-related buff, is what I think anyway. It's the Jackal creed. So firing assault weapons without penalty, it's hardly going to make a difference. These days you're lucky if you get 1 wound through with a shotgun or something. So, this isn't really something that's going to make a massive difference. As far as I'm concerned, that's nothing. So the bit where it gives you an extra bit to the save, take it or leave it, what's a 4+ save on some toughness 3 guardsman equivalent? Let's have a look. How do you say it? Pauper Princes. The way that they reroll or failed hit rolls immediately when they charge or intervene, I feel like they deserve a second aspect to this creed, because it's nice, but it's underwhelming to me in a faction where I can already get rerolls to hit and reroll ones and all that stuff anyway, even inherent with the cool icons. So yeah, something more there. Hive Cult. Being able to fall back and shoot at a penalty is horrendous. You know, anytime a hybrid squad gets charged, you know, they'll disintegrate immediately before they even get a chance to consider falling back. You know, this creed needs something similar like the Cadians perhaps, like reroll ones and shooting if they stand still, or I don't know, maybe like exploding sixes at half ranges like the Silent Stormtrooper doctrine. I mean, the morale part is crap too. You just bring a Patriarch and you don't have to think about morale. I like the idea that it's a military rifleman sort of creed. You know, there's so many Astra Militarum style buffs that they could port over, just like extended rapid fire range, or, you know, perhaps just -1 AP on auto guns in general. That would be great. You know, the Lambden Lions get it on their stuff, so why can't we get it on ours? Okay, the one that I think is critically flawed and outdated is Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor. It doesn't even make sense. It's in the part that says add 1 to advance rolls for units that are set up on the battlefield in turn 2, thus as deep strike. Well, who the fuck wrote that part? You know, you can't move after you come in after deep strike anyway, so it's totally pointless. The first turn buff part is just add 1 to advance and charge rolls. Well, maybe just go Twisted Helix anyway, and then you've already got +2 to your advance rolls, and that's all game. It needs major revisions, and to make it simple, how about just all units get +1 to charge all the time? Or I don't know, maybe all units with the creed can advance and charge, full stop, you know? White Scars get that, why not us? One thing I did consider is having a creed that gets access to +1 toughness, unlike Twisted Helix get +1 strength. That would really change the way that the entire faction could be played. Toughness 4 hybrids, toughness 5 aberrants, imagine that. I mean, I'm not sure if I'd choose it personally, but just for sheer diversity and options, that would be awesome. Perhaps something they could alter in the Rusted Claw or the Pauper Princess, who knows? So, point number 2, custom cult traits. Just burn them, literally burn them all. Start from fresh, you know. I've never seen such an underwhelming collection of ideas in any codex ever. They're terrible. Start fresh. 3, let our vehicles benefit from creeds. This one just seems obvious. The 2 things that would benefit most from Bladed Cogs and Vulnerable save can't. The Goliath trucks and the Ridge Runners. Why have a creed if the things that need it are exempt? I mean, the other ones would tie in nicely as well. For example, Advanced Bust for speed, the Twisted Helix. You know, Hive Cults falling back and shooting, Rusted Claw for a +1 to save against small arms. It would just make sense. As I've said before, other factions get this as standard, so why do we have to be the oddballs here? And next, carry on with this theme, let the Patriarch benefit from his own greed as well, and the Genestealers, of course. It just needs to happen for the only reason they'd be so cool. I mean, the Patriarch is already strong, yes, he doesn't need this, but, you know, think of how awesome it would be. I'm already like fantasizing about how fast the Twisted Helix Patriarch would be with a +2 to advance, and, you know, he'd be base 7 strength before any warlord traits or relics you could slap on top of that. I mean, the big question is, would that really be such a huge thing to ask for? Would it break him? I don't think so. The real deal breaker would be the PURESTRAINS Genestealers, however, because if the Patriarch got it, they would have to too. My opinion would be, you know, make them expensive, or at least relatively so compared to the classic Tyranid counterparts. I mean, to be fair, they already are more expensive, and I'd see this as a fair trade. Right now, they're just pointlessly worse. So the extra points could be attributed to the faster advances. They'll be strength 5 or getting invulns of 4 acquired through Bladed Cog. Right now, it's just not enough that they can deep strike. They either need more damage output or more durability to be viable for the cost. As I've said in other videos, Twisted Helix Acolytes are objective secured troops that are stronger, cheaper, equally as fast, vastly more capable of dealing damage with hand flamers and mining tools. And on top of that, they've still got the rending claws. So that's why no one takes Genestealers. Number 5, let's update the Gift from Beyond. This is a quick one, it's very specific. I love this relic, and I think a lot of other people do too, because it's just so weird and wacky. So when 9th edition came along, they dropped the blanket rule of you can only plus or minus hit and wound rolls to a maximum of 1. So this rifle's essential ability of add 2 to the wound roll was suddenly defunct. So you can only now max out +1 to wound, so it'll be 5 or 6. Because basically what happens is you get a wound roll of 6 with this, and then you get an automatic mortal. So that guarantees that the next bit's going to trigger. So if you had the +2, it's on a 4, 5, or 6. So, as this all works, if you get that mortal, then it means that at the end of all the damage, the psyker who you're shooting at, assuming you're shooting a psyker, which you should be because that's the whole point of this gun, they automatically suffer perils of the warp at the end. And you know what that means? Basically, they'll probably die from it, and then there'll be an explosion of perils of the warp, and all the people around it, they'll all suffer from it too. So, it's sick. So the simple way to fix this would just literally be in the wording. They'll just have to change it and say, on a wound roll of 4+, it inflicts a mortal wound. Same thing. Nice and easy. Okay, point number 6. Let's update mining lasers and seismic cannons. I've seen a lot of stuff like Drukhari have been getting their update, and there's also teasers for the Adeptus Mechanicus that they're going to be getting las cannon and las cannon equivalent weapons that are being changed from D6 damage to D3+3. So essentially a minimum of 4 total. I think that's a pretty big deal, and it would be very sad if Genestealer Cults' own versions don't see similar treatment. The mining laser is the only thing that we've got that deals damage at range against enemy armor. The heavy variants such as on the Rock Grinder and the Ridge Runner are D3 shots, which I've always found very swingy. Honestly, I think it'd be better just to have them as heavy too. At least then you know what you're getting. It's more reliable. As for the seismic cannons, they're kind of in an odd place, to be honest. It's nice that they do flat damage, but for some reason I just don't ever see people take them or talk about them. Maybe it's something to do with the short range on the high power setting. Who knows? I don't really have the answers for this one, but maybe just giving it a bit of a strength buff on the lower power mode, that would make it relevant. Unless you're playing as Bladed Cog, it doesn't even seem right. There's a heavy weapon that you need to get up close and personal with, because you're going to be shooting on 5+. It's just crap. You're not going to be sitting at the back in the rear with it and expecting it to perform when you can't even get those ranges on it. Part of me thinks this weapon is a hidden gem, but I just can't really figure it out in the circumstances yet. Okay, the Primus. He's just way too easy to kill, especially for a combat character. If anything touches this guy, he will melt almost instantly, unless you're lucky enough to save him using questioning loyalty, bodyguard rolls. I just don't understand why they'll make a unit like this so fragile when he's supposed to be up there at the front line, with the rest of the troops slicing and dicing. He's just got 5 wounds, 5+ armor save, and that's it. There's no invuln. Even Astra Militarum platoon commanders get a refractor field, and they're like a third of the cost. Maybe it would make sense if his weapons were any good, but they're a pile of wank too. Barely any AP, single damage. His loadout's just way behind the curve, and it needs updating urgently. Right now, the only reason to take him is his buffing aura, which is, to be fair, absolutely sick. Speaking of combat characters, let's dish some dirt on the Abominant. Right now, this big bitch is the black sheep of the faction. He's an absolute opposite example of what the cult are known for. He's big, hard, durable, and he hits like an absolute truck, but once in a blue moon. I can't even begin to explain my experience of using him, but to sum him up, basically, I love using him as a big bully who just scares the life out of my opponents. He stomps up the board, he charges into combat, and then he just fucking misses all of his attacks. Every time, literally in every game I've played him, he gets into a one-on-one brawl with something big, and he just can't hit the damn thing because of his shit weapon skill. It's 3+ but -1 because of the sledgehammer. So, you end up with this situation where he's stuck with this thing where he can't hit it, so he can't kill it, and the other thing hasn't got enough damage to kill him. And so it's just like an ongoing fight which lasts 1, 2, 3, 4 turns, and it just never ends. So, it's not like he's cheap. I think some tinkering needs to be done here. Ideally, his sledgehammer needs to lose the -1 to hit penalty. And he needs more attacks in general. Maybe not with the heavy duty sledgehammer itself, because that would just make his damage, crazy high. But he just needs maybe, like one of those things where it's like you choose the option. Do you do the big smash or do you do the big swing? Big smash does the big damage and the big swing does, ×2 attacks. That would make it work, or at least just let him have some extra attacks with his rending claw. Lastly, I've got to be honest, I don't really see this guy as a HQ choice. It's really hard to fit him into a battalion when you've already got the Patriarch, the Primus, and the Magus, who, and also the Icon Ward, and if that's your flavour, the Jackal Alphas. They're all sitting in there, and you need them for most of your tactics. So the Abominant's just sat, here like going, what about me? You know, he should move to an elite slot, you know, because you can get loads of those, or even like the heavy support option, because it's really hard to fill out heavy support unless you want loads of rock grinders. So keeping on with the characters discussion, let's talk about GENE-SECT, which is the one of each character rule in a detachment, which is also fucking stupid. So it's easy to miss this in the Codex. It's a really little line, which, you know, I didn't even see for fucking months. But I've absolutely no idea why they did this. No other factions have this pointless restriction, as far as I know anyway. So it says you can only have one of each character per detachment. So maybe that was all well and good in 8th, since they'll be bringing, like, you know, maybe 3 detachments so we can max out the CP. But that's the thing of the past. So now, why should we be stopped from fielding, let's say, 3 Patriarchs or 3 Canamorphs if we want to? At stretch, I would say, sure, maybe they restrict the Patriarchs, you know, for fluff reasons. You know, there should be one at the head of the cult. But, you know, other things, Catamorphs, Sanctuses, whatever, you know, Locuses, it would just be fun and fluff to be able to do whatever we want. It's not going to break things, so, you know, it's not 2018 anymore. Okay, number 10, a stratagems rework. Now, you know, this some great Genestealer Cult stratagems. We're known for being that faction who's like, you know, we could come in the first turn and blow 24 fucking CP if we really wanted to and still feel like we needed more because we were that faction. But, you know, now you look at it, there's 12 in a game plus the ones you earn every phase. You're really struggling and you have to be picky, and there's so many in this list that are just not worth it. You would never even think about it, because things like, you know, perfect ambush, it's 3 CP. That's, you know, already like a quarter of what you're going to get. So you've got to be, you know, so careful with how you spend them now. So some things here have got to change. I think lying in wait should go down to 1 CP, because that is an absolute belter of a stratagem. Half of it was to do with, you know, you wanted to be able to deep strike in and get your hand flamers into range, but you don't need to do that anymore because they've gone up to 12-inch range. So right now this stratagem is purely for dropping down in the backfield and grabbing objectives from under another player's node. Let's say they've got one guy who's on the side of an objective like this, you could drop in more guys than him and suddenly that is yours. So it's still great, but it's just not necessary to be 2 CP anymore. It's a quintessential tactic as well. It just feels like that's what a cult should be doing. The main one, perfect ambush, is great, but it's got to lose the bit which says D6 movement. Like the amount of times I've paid 3 CP just to come in from deep strike and then I roll a 1 and it's like, meh. It's just like the most painful situation ever. What's the point? You know, it's 3 CP, it's not cheap. You may as well just be able to come in, instantly move 6 or shoot, you know, which is still a very valid option. Now, with the loss of specialist attachments from match play, you know, they should bring over some of the ones that they had, like from Anointed, what was it? Anointed something. So yeah, there were stratagems like Devotion Till Death, which is one where aberrants get to fight again in combat when they are killed. Like, well, I don't know who else can do it. Probably loads of people. But yeah, so, you know, you get killed and then you die and then you just fight again before you remove that model. It's a great way to just get those aberrants stuck in there, have your brawl, and then it's like the enemy player, if they know you've got this in your pocket, they're like, oh, I actually kind of don't want to kill the aberrants because then they're just going to smash me again. It's a great one. Now, I'm really hoping that Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor get to keep their Vect, which is, you know, a planned generation in the making. Apparently, Drukhari lost their version in the new Codex, so I'll be very disappointed to see it go as well. This is an absolute fucking killer stratagem. So for 3 CP, you get to deny a stratagem placed by the enemy, but you still have to roll a dice to do it. So if you roll a 1, it doesn't work. So usually what I'd do is I'd have my Twisted Helix battalion and then have a patrol of Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor with another Patriarch in it. So I'll charge up multiple units, maybe on my first turn, and then, you know, as soon as I fought my first one, the enemy will think, okay, I'm going to interrupt now, and then I go, nope, plan generations in the making, and then deny them that, and then I fight again with my other ones. So it just ensures that that fight goes on. But anyway, one thing that I'm desperately in need of, at least the way that I play, is a second Warlord trait stratagem. So right now what we've got is Brood Coven. So you pay 1 CP, and then assuming you've got a Patriarch and a Primus and a Magus, the Magus and the Primus also get to have a Warlord trait. So, you know, it's 1 CP for 2, so I think that's pretty cool. But the thing is, I don't really need a Warlord trait on either of them. What I want is to be able to have something like an Abominant or, you know, a Jackal Alphas maybe, and get something on them. But at the moment, you know, you'd have to have them as your warlord, and that's your only warlord trait. So I appreciate that if you had this, then you would have Broodcoven. Maybe you'd have to choose one or the other. Like you either have Broodcoven or you have another warlord trait on, you know, whoever you want. I mean, personally, what I also wanted to do was put Bioalchemist on a Ketamorph, so he gets damage flat 3 pistols. 12 shots of that, it can really fuck people up. It's great. Let's look at something else that needs to be changed. The Weber. Great concept for a weapon. Terrible execution. It needs completely rewriting. As it stands, it's basically a one-shot flamer. It auto hits just once, and then when you're looking to wound, you can choose to match it up against the strength or the toughness of the enemy unit, which I suppose is nice. Only typically they're the same anyway, and who the fuck would waste time going through all this hassle when you know it's not going to get past their armor save? To be even remotely viable, the damage needs to be higher, like flat damage 2, or the rate of fire needs to be higher, like assault 2. Right now, it's just the worst of both worlds, and for that reason, it sits firmly on the shelf. So, Cult Ambush Blips. This point's going to be a bit different from the others, actually. I want the Cult Ambush rule to stay exactly the same, like no changes. I think that this part actually works great, and they nailed it first time. I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, maybe a little bit of clarification around my sneaky blip tactic, which allows you to deploy forwards your own zone with singular entities. I've probably said it before a million times, but you get a Goliath truck with people inside it, you spawn forward, and then they jump out of the truck, and you get up to like 9 inches of extra movement before you even do your movement. But anyway, I think the wording around that maybe needs a little bit of clearing up, so there's no doubt on either side. I mean, I know it's possible, but people still doubt it. I mean, if they actually change the wording and stop this from being possible, well, suffice to say, I'll be very, very upset. My entire game plan would be, changed, and I'll be like... But in relation to this, I think there's other things that could be added in. I mean, like the Nexus, for example, he's got the ability to move blips. I think it would be great if he had the ability to move a blip out of the deployment zone, just one maybe, because if you look at other factions, like they get infiltrator style stuff, they can start in the middle of the board on objectives. Out of all the factions in the game, we're the ones who get to pop up from the ground and do all the sneaky shit. We should be the ones who get to do stuff like that. So maybe the Nexus had a thing where you could move a blip out. The only difficulty will be then, because we've got the 9-inch kind of deny radius. If we move one straight into the middle of the board, suddenly that's like, okay, you can't move anywhere near the middle of the board in the first turn. So that might need to be looked at. Brood Brothers, they need to be made worthwhile. Just before 9th edition dropped, I was a huge fan of Brood Brothers, and I went as far as buying and making a whole Brood Brothers army, complete with about 120 infantry, and then I had veterans and special weapon squads and command squads. I had Scions and Bullgrins, I had a Stormlord Baneblade variant, I had a Malkador Defender and Chimeras. I'll never use those things, but they look cool. But the real genius part of this was, or at least intended to be, that you could take advantage of a separate Brood Brothers detachment, full of allied in Astra Militarum stuff like company commanders and whatever, and then they could issue voice commands classically across into the other detachment where you had the Genestealer Cult Codex Brood Brothers, and then cross-reference them. So the important part is that, Brood Brothers in a main codex were 20-man squads. That's enough to make most guard players jealous as it is, because they can only do infantry squads of 10. Now, for one squad of 20 men doing first rank, second rank fire and rapid fire, that's 80 shots, which is a lot. And then what you could do is, you could ambush them in. So these guys could basically deep strike. So you would have 20 men dropping in, all doing 80 shots. And then the clever part was that you could ally in, one of these commanders, or more specifically, a Tempesta Prime, which is like a Scion commander. So he could deep strike as well. So you would have your men come down, bang, he would come down near them, and then you do, the orders, you would get the 80 shots. You could do that with like 2 squads, you could do it with 4 squads, you could do it with all of these squads. So the sad thing is, this is a thing of the past now. So officers from allied Astra Militarum detachments can no longer give orders across into your main Genestealer Cult Codex Brood Brother squads, because they have the Genestealer Cults tagline or keyword, whatever it is. So, you know, this sucks, especially, you know, after I spent all this money and time, you know, painting them all up, and, you know, it looked sick, but that's never going to get used now. So the point is, what would I like to see here? First of all, I'd love to be able to do this again, but I can see why it might be a bit of a complication. Games Workshop want to stay away from. So I propose something a little bit different. I like to see all the orders and the stuff brought over, perhaps for, like, you know, Brew Brothers to get their own unique voice, you know, command. Like, I don't know, let's say as if they were Krieg, you know, how they get to that thing where they fight when they die in melee, or perhaps even like something like a buff to Unquestioning Loyalty, where, like, you know, you give the order and then from that point on until the next battle round, they add one to Unquestioning Loyalty rules. You know, that would give them a point. But what I really want is to see a new model which would be a Brood Brothers commander, like a HQ choice or an elite or something like that. Let's face it right now, the Brood Brothers are like a crappy side piece to the rest of the Codex. They're just identical to Neophyte hybrids in every way. They cost the same, they move the same, they shoot the same, they've got almost the same weapons and armor values, everything, but they just can't benefit from the creeds, so what's the fucking point? You know, no one's ever going to use them while they're the same. You know, there needs to be an incentive which sets them apart. Okay, coming to the end now, the familiars. These are existing in a bit of a grey area right now. It's like they're characters, but they're not, sort of. You know, they really need some clarification on how other people interact with them. I'm a firm believer that they can act as bodyguards for the Patriarch, since they have a single wound each and they're part of the same squad. And big flat damage strikes to the squad can be partitioned off into one of them rather than into the Patriarch himself. It's a great way to mitigate damage on your Warlord, and I'll be doing videos about this. But it's always a bit awkward trying to explain how it works, because even I can't say I 100% understand it and if I'm, you know, getting it right. But as far as I know, currently, you know, they're part of the same squad. And let's say, you know, if you had a 10-man squad of infantry and they got shot, you choose the ones which take the wounds. So it's like if you've got a Patriarch and other familiars who are part of the same squad, surely if something big hits them, you get to choose which one takes the wound. So it makes sense to me. Only in the rules it says you can only target and you have to wound the Patriarch on his toughness, even if the familiar is the one that's going to take the wound. Needs clearing up, definitely. In my eyes, I think this should just be untargetable. Simple, clear and cut. You have to focus on the Patriarch, use his toughness and his save, and then the familiars can basically act as like a mini shield drone. You just siphon off some damage onto them. Okay, lastly, new models and new units. Things I'd love to see. There's so many ideas I've had over the years. Well, years, it's only been like 2 years. But, you know, I forget most of them anyway. But as I mentioned before, you know, more Brood Brothers stuff would be great. I'd love to see that become a really fully fledged part of the army. Other stuff I'd like to see, a unique tank maybe, you know, something like a Brood Brothers Macarius or a Malcador, something that could sit in the heavy support slot that we lack so badly. You know, a Rock Grinder's all right, but that's it. That's the choice we've got. I feel like Genestealer Cult really missed out on the big centerpiece model front. You know, we've got no Lord of War or anything like that. No heavy tanks, big monsters, or, you know, just big, like, shit. So Games Workshop are really spitting out these big boys for all the other factions right now. So I don't see why we shouldn't get one. You know, remember that stupid tectonic frag drill fortification thing that we have, which I also pointlessly purchased. You know, we could get some kind of thematic drilling tank or something which, you know, incorporates that, like where you just activate the drill and then it goes down and it actually does something. You know, there's so many thematic things which tie into the whole mining colony vibe. You know, if you look on Google and search Genestealer Cult conversions, you know, Games Workshop just need to look at that stuff and go, fucking hell, these people are so creative and cool, and wow, why don't we just make that a new unit? You know, it's just almost like the work's done for them. How about some unique pure strain Genestealers? That'll piss off the Tyranid players, won't it? One thing I've put in my videos before is my Genestealer Cult Bulgrin or Ogrin or whatever. So, you know, whilst usually I'd kind of ally them in, what about, you know, having those part of our actual codex, like some kind of new unit, like hybrid Ogrin or whatever. You know, they've been infected by the gene worm, whatever the fuck it's called, and, you know, they become our version of what Bulgrin do for Astra Militarum, like a big bully unit who can sit on objectives and deflect fire, and they've got high invuln save, and they can just be our guys who are, you know, hard and able to stand up to that kind of shit, because right now we don't have that. So, you know, it would be nice to fill in that gap, even just, you know, by 1 unit. So anyway, I think that almost covers everything I've got to say. You know, if there's anything I missed out on, if you've got any of your own ideas, put them in the comments. You know, I want to hear them. I think it'd be great to kickstart a sort of, you know, Genestealer Cult faction, community, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Because right now, we don't have that. Every other, you know, faction in the game has probably got, like, you know, some YouTube channels where, like, you know, people come together, they talk about ideas, they help each other, and they support each other. You know, right now, this is why I started the channel, because it doesn't exist for us. And, you know, maybe our time's coming around again. Can only hope. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.